Welcome to the Daily Report on this Thursday, July 11, 2024. I'm Lindsay Reiser in for John Dickerson. Tonight, a tale of two realities for President Biden. One on the world stage convening with NATO leaders, the other fighting for his political life at home. His campaign saying in a memo, no one else can beat Trump, all while more than a dozen Democratic lawmakers now publicly call for him to step aside, with more doing so privately. Is the dam breaking? How Texans are coping in triple-digit temperatures without electricity following Beryl, while the West grapples with a double dose of heat and wildfires. What new inflation numbers tell us about the gap between the rich and the rest. And from apex to art, how an 11-foot-tall dinosaur skeleton ended up on the auction block, and why some are saying it belongs in an exhibit instead. The Daily Report starts right now. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with President Biden facing a crucial test as he wraps up the NATO 75th anniversary summit in Washington. The president is set to take questions from reporters exactly 2 weeks after his debate performance against Donald Trump, which sparked concerns among voters and fellow Democrats about his mental fitness. The White House has tried to counter those concerns with a display of strength on the world stage. President Biden has used this week's NATO summit to reaffirm a long-term commitment to supporting Ukraine and its war with Russia. Earlier, the president held a bilateral meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
He made it clear Russia will not prevail in Ukraine, will not prevail in Ukraine. Ukraine will prevail. And I want you to know we're going to be with you every step of the way.
I'm grateful to you, your team, your administration, of course, Congress, both parties, both chambers, and all Americans for their vital and your strong support.
CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis is at the State Department. So, Olivia, what are the big takeaways coming out of the NATO summit?
Sure, Lindsay. I think the overall takeaway was that resounding expression of support for Ukraine, both materially and rhetorically. From this summit, Kyiv is walking away with a big influx of military support, specifically from the U.S. It's got F-16s coming. It's got new Patriot batteries coming. And alliance-wide, it's got more than $40 billion coming over the next year in military support. In terms of rhetorically, it was reassured again that it's on a pathway to NATO. There's no timeline for that, but its pathway was described in the alliance-wide declaration as irreversible, something the Ukrainians had sought and its staunchest allies had sought. That language was included in the declaration that its path to European integration and NATO membership was, again, irreversible. It also got alliance-wide condemnation of Russia and of its backers, North Korea, Iran, and China. China got labeled a decisive enabler of Moscow's war machine, something that the Chinese have already objected to. It got accused alliance-wide again of providing weapons components to fuel Russia's efforts in Ukraine. And there were other agreements, including NATO now taking over the coordination of future deliveries of military aid, which is designed to forestall unpredictability and delays of the kind that the United States itself caused earlier this year. This is all notable because the alliance managed to speak with one voice, right? There were no spoilers from the likes of Turkey or Hungary, which some had feared. For the most part, and at least on paper, there was unanimity.
Obviously, we know this is happening during a very contentious time amid domestic politics. We have the president who told ABC last week, watch me when it comes to the NATO summit and how he's tested every day in the job he does. Then he introduces President Zelensky today. He misspeaks and calls him President Putin. He did correct himself. But we have Finland's president telling CNN that he's spoken with Biden on many occasions over the last 48 hours. He says he has absolutely no concerns about the capacity of the current president of the U.S. to lead the country. Any other leaders speaking out about this?
A few spoke today. French President Emmanuel Macron was asked by a reporter about Biden's abilities. He said, I don't understand your question about President Biden. He's my counterpart. We are happy to have him as President of the United States. The new British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, said in an interview that when he met Biden at the White House yesterday, that his own personal view was that Biden was in good form and showed incredible leadership during the summit. Now, those are just two, in addition to the Finnish leader that you mentioned. out of more than 30 world leaders that have gathered here, of course. But those are among the most prominent and powerful allies of the United States. There have been other reports with anonymous European diplomatic sources expressing concerns about Biden's abilities, expressing frustration that his health has sort of obfuscated and eclipsed some of the real achievements coming out of this alliance. But it's really hard to gauge those without names and roles attached to them on the record.
Okay, Olivia Gazis, thank you.
Thank you.
While the White House is hoping to project strength on the world stage with Thursday's press conference, not everyone in Congress is convinced. More congressional Democrats came out Thursday calling on the president to step aside, making now more than a dozen to do so publicly. Several others expressing concerns about his ability to defeat Donald Trump. Earlier, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries told reporters about the internal discussions in his caucus.
We have engaged in a process of talking to each other. Those conversations have been candid, comprehensive, and clear-eyed. Until that process has concluded, I'm not going to address what any outside stakeholders may have to say about this matter.
CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang and CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian join us now from Washington. Weijia, this is the president's first press conference since the debate. How crucial is it for him?
Lindsay, the stakes could not be higher here, mostly because it is a press conference in which the president, is not able to read from a teleprompter or a script. And that is the scenario that we saw during the debate, because even though afterward he's had a string of events where he appeared much clearer, much more energetic, the question is, whether he can live up to those same standards when it's a situation that he has to answer in real time. And so the stakes are quite high, Lindsay, because there is no room for error. Now, if you ask me whether, a solid performance or whether he knocks it out of the park could change the game here for President Biden, I don't think so. I don't think that will be enough to change the minds of so many who have questions about this, which is why the stakes are so high. So it's necessary for political survival to keep going, but it's not sufficient, Lindsay, to, change everything for the president.
Nicole, we had a handful of Democrats calling for the president to step aside, then sort of a pause. And now it feels like today there's been more and more coming out saying publicly. Is there anything the president can do or say at this point to stem the tide?
I think for some lawmakers, yes, and for some lawmakers, no. I mean, look, I think you also have to continue to put this in perspective. Some of the latest members of Congress who have called on the president to step aside just now include Illinois Congressman Brad Schneider, as well as Greg Stanton of Arizona. So we're now up to about a dozen members or so. But keep in mind, there are over 200 House Democrats. So relatively speaking, it's still a small number. You just have one Senator, Peter Welch of Vermont, who has also called on the president to step aside. And, there is speculation about whether the dam or tide could break after this press conference that the president has today. But I can tell you, in terms of talking to many Senate Democrats who spoke with Biden campaign officials earlier this afternoon, there still is a pretty big split. And you have some Senate Democrats who say that they are still firmly in the president's camp, that nothing has changed their mind or their posture at this point, but others who say this conversation is continuing and their concerns haven't necessarily been quelled. There has also been talk about whether there can be some resolution by this weekend. But I think right now, everyone feels that at the end of the day, it is up to the president to make a decision, even though he has clearly stated that he is in the race, but certainly people still looking to the president for signals.
Weijia, in a new memo obtained by CBS News, the Biden campaign writes, quote, "The movement we have seen, while real, is not a sea change in the state of the race. While some of this movement was from undecided voters to Trump, much of the movement was driven by historically Democratic constituencies moving to undecided." What does that mean, and how is this not a sea change in the state of the race?
So the campaign says if they zoom out, Lindsay, to a very big picture here, that the divide between Biden and Trump is not that much greater than it was pre-debate. So they're trying to make the case that the debate actually didn't really change things in terms of the substantive numbers for them. And they believe that, these two are still neck and neck. It remains incredibly competitive. And in this memo, Lindsay, it says that there is no other Democrat who could outperform Biden. But of course, we have to consider the source and consider where this is coming from, the Biden campaign. I will say that, Biden campaign advisors, as well as a White House advisor, took all this information up to Capitol Hill today to Senate Democrats to try to show them the path to victory as the president continues to hemorrhage support.
Nicole, you said that this decision is going to be the president's alone. We have Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries telling reporters it's his goal to talk to every single person, and he plans to meet with his leadership team to determine the next step. What does that mean?
Well, I think the leader has been very intentional here. I mean, he has been meeting with just about every faction within the House Democratic caucus for the better part of a week plus. It started with conversations last week with leadership. He talked with ranking members. He has spoken to members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Progressive Caucus, frontline Democrats, as well as, the New Democrat Coalition, which represents a broad swath of members. So he really is trying to have everyone's ear, make sure that when and if the time comes to take this case to the president, which we understand he will at some point, that he has everybody's viewpoints and perspectives to be able to provide the best assessment to the president. So I think that is why you are seeing the leader be very deliberate here to make sure he has a firm pulse of his caucus before he approaches the president.
Weijia Jiang and Nicole Killian, appreciate both of you.
You bet.
And a programming note, we will have full coverage of the Republican National Convention next week. Our America Decides team will have special coverage starting at 5 p.m. Monday through Thursday. That's Easter time, and that's right here on CBS News 24/7. As President Biden met with world leaders at the NATO summit, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban flew to Mar-a-Lago Thursday to meet with former President Trump. The move comes days after Orban held a controversial meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Prime Minister Orban, who attended the NATO summit but did not have any personal meetings with the Biden administration, has been on a so-called peace mission to negotiate an end to the Russia-Ukraine war without consulting the U.S. or the EU. CBS News' Margaret Brennan spoke with Orban's political director about where Donald Trump fits into his plans.
What we experience is that he is capable of doing something, and he's capable of stopping the war. He has to know how he can achieve his goals and the American goals. But the current American administration strategy, which is about continuation of the war and fueling further conflict, according to our view, it leads us nowhere.
Margaret pointed out that Trump did supply Ukraine with weapons while in office. The Biden administration has continued that support while working with European allies to broker a peace deal. A U.S.-built pier designed to increase the humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip is expected to be permanently dismantled. The Pentagon said Thursday the pier will soon cease operations. The $230 million mission announced in March by President Biden has been damaged several times by rough seas. Meanwhile, the Israeli military is extending its operations in the Gaza Strip. CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams has more from Tel Aviv. Holly?
Good evening, Lindsay. Israel's military has urged all residents of Gaza City to evacuate and head south and says the city is now a dangerous combat zone. Now, the United Nations says the evacuation will, quote, only fuel mass suffering. Gaza City was the Gaza Strip's biggest city before this war, with a population of over 500,000. This is the second time during the war that the entire city has been told to evacuate. Israel's military says it's targeting militants and their infrastructure and claims in one neighborhood alone it's killed over 150 militants and destroyed 8 tunnels. Our CBS News producer in Gaza, Marwan Al-Ghul, reports there was heavy bombardment overnight of Gaza City. Meanwhile, ceasefire talks resumed in Qatar yesterday, with both the CIA director William Burns and Israel's spy chief taking part, according to Israeli media. Israel says another delegation is scheduled to fly to Cairo tonight to continue the talks. US officials are sounding positive about reaching an agreement, but some in this region are less optimistic after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday that he would only agree to a ceasefire deal that leaves the door open for Israel to resume fighting. And Hamas said this week that the latest assault in Gaza City could, quote, reset the negotiation process to square one. Lindsay.
Holly Williams in Tel Aviv, thank you. Well, you may be seeing a lot about Project 2025 on your social media feeds lately. The conservative blueprint includes several proposals for the tax code. We're going to speak with an expert about their potential impacts and practicality. Plus, America's stock indices have had a record year, but that wealth has not trickled down to all Americans. We're going to look at the widening gap in the economic experiences of America's top 10% and bottom 90. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Of Hurricane Beryl drenched parts of New England Thursday. The region didn't get a direct hit from the storm, but its remains caused major flooding in Vermont and New Hampshire. The rain caused evacuation warnings in some parts, destroyed bridges, and washed away an apartment building. Meanwhile, in Texas, where Hurricane Beryl made its U.S. landfall earlier this week, more than 1 million homes and businesses in the Houston area remain without power. The city also remains under an excessive heat warning. CBS News correspondent Janet Shanlian has the latest from Houston. Janet?
Hi, Lindsay. We're at Houston's Energy Arena, and they are prepared to house a couple hundred people tonight who've been discharged from a hospital but don't have a home to go to that has air conditioning tonight. And that's the story of what's going on in Houston today. There are more than 1 million people still without power 4 days after this storm. There is increasing frustration and anger at the region's main provider, CenterPoint Energy. Now, CenterPoint, for its part, says it has already restored power to 1 million people and that it will restore power to at least 500,000 more by Sunday night. But we could go into Monday, 1 week past this storm, with hundreds of thousands of people still without power amid temperatures that are in the 90s and the feel-like temperature in some places more than 100 degrees. How is the city adapting? They've opened cooling centers, not just at places like this, but community centers, the YMCA. Even Houston's Contemporary Art Museum has opened as a cooling center where people can come charge their devices and just stay cool for a couple of hours. Of course, those are not open overnight, and therein lies the issue where people have to go home to a hot house. Today, I was at a community center that was handing out water and some basic food items, and people had been waiting for hours in that line because everything in their refrigerator had gone bad, and they didn't have the funds to go completely restock their refrigerator if their grocery store was even open. This has been especially hard on compromised communities, senior citizen centers. Some of those are high-rise buildings without power. How do you get someone down from the 7th floor and back up? So 4 days after this storm, it is an unfolding crisis here in the Houston area. Lindsay?
A lot of logistical challenges remain. Janet Shanlian, thank you. Well, some encouraging economic news in the fight against higher prices. U.S. inflation slowed more than expected in June. Labor Department data released Thursday showed the annual inflation rate cooled from 3.3% in May to 3% last month. That's lower than the 3.1% rate some economists had projected. The latest reading marked its lowest level since 2021. Gina Smialik joins me for more. She's a Federal Reserve and U.S. economy reporter for the New York Times. Gina, always good when we get to speak. And the last time we talked, after the jobs report came out, now we have this new inflation data. Is this the CPI report the Fed has been waiting for?
I think it is. This was sort of unanimously across the board. Everything in this report looked really good. This was very positive news for the Fed. We saw, as you sort of mentioned in the intro here, we saw this big headline decline on the year-over-year number. We also saw an outright drop in prices just on the month-over-month basis. And so I think that combination, the fact that prices are actually moderating on a monthly basis, even if you strip out food and fuel prices, which we know can be very volatile, prices only very slightly climbed over the last month. I think all of this wraps together to be really good news for the Fed. This is the kind of moderate inflation that they've been hoping to see. And this is the kind of progress that'll take us back to their 2% goal over time.
What does that mean for when they meet in September?
So they meet next, actually, at the end of July. Most people don't think that they're going to make a move that early, but at that follow-up meeting in September, a lot of economists, a lot of investors think that a rate move, if things stay on track, is anything, pretty much what we should expect at this point. It seems likely that the Fed is headed for a couple of rate increases. I think the big question now is how many they're going to fit in before the end of the year. If they move in September, will they also then move in December? And we're just going to have to wait and see what Fed officials say over the coming weeks and sort of how data plays out from here. This is obviously very good news for them, though, and will allow them to get started on that process.
Sorry, rate decreases, right?
Rate decreases, yes, correct.
So that said, the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell just said it's unlikely interest rates will ever return to the super low levels seen between the 2008 financial crisis and the pandemic. So what does that mean for Americans?
Yeah, so between the sort of 2009 crisis and the pandemic, we had interest rates that were regularly flirting with or at actual zero. So very, very low interest rates. What Chair Powell is saying is that we're not likely to go back to that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have rates at these levels forever. So rates are at 5.3% now. That's obviously a lot above that zero level that we were seeing before the pandemic. There's a lot of room in between here and there. So I think what people can look forward to is potentially a world where we go back to something that allows your mortgage, allows your credit card payment to be a little bit less drastic than it is today, but probably not all the way down to where we were in that period after 2009. That said, there's a good reason for that. Growth is stronger than it was in that period. That was a long stretch of a very weak labor market and a very weak economy. And so the reason that rates are a bit higher is that we're having a much stronger economic backdrop.
Let's talk housing prices. They rose 0.2% in June and 5.2% from a year earlier. That's good news because it means it's really the slowest pace of year-over-year growth since 2022. So how does the Federal Reserve view this reading, and how should Americans view it?
So this has really been the most important shoe to drop when it comes to inflation and where inflation has been headed. We've been waiting for months and months and months to see some sort of slowdown in rent of primary residence, so how much people are paying for their rents, and it just wasn't materializing for a bunch of reasons. And this month, we finally saw a cool down in how quickly rents are increasing in these official inflation data. So the reason that this is such good news is it's going to allow overall inflation to really start to come down and really moderate in a permanent way, because it's such a big portion of inflation in America, just because if you think about it, what we spend our money on, a lot of that gets tied up in housing. And so, assuming this trend persists, this is very good news for the Fed. It should sort of convince them that their job is finally getting done on wrestling inflation back under control.
Gina Smiley, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The NASDAQ and S&P 500 both fell slightly Thursday, but the day's downward turn came after a record-breaking year so far. Two of the major stock indices, the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones Industrial Average, are both up more than 15% compared to a year ago. Financial analysts point to this as an example of the U.S. economy's health. But the benefits are not accessible to all Americans. Only 21% of Americans own individual stocks, and a smaller number invest directly in mutual funds, according to the Federal Reserve. Even 401ks and IRAs, the retirement accounts companies encourage and sometimes contribute to, are not owned by all Americans. Only 54% of all Americans have any kind of stock-based retirement fund. For those who are invested in the stock market, as of this January, the richest 10% of U.S. households owned $42.7 trillion in stock market wealth, or 93% of the entire stock market's value. A rally on Wall Street doesn't necessarily translate to more money in your pocket on Wall Street. While the median pay package for CEOs, many of which are tied to stock market performance, rose 12.6% in 2023, according to an AP analysis, wages and benefits for their employees only rose 4.1%. And they're feeling that pinch at the grocery store. Prices are 23% higher than they were 5 years ago, despite the inflation rate dropping back to around pre-pandemic levels. The effects are the most visible in the staple goods lower income families rely on: bread, milk, eggs. And there's this phenomenon called cheapflation. So let's say you're looking at different brands of pasta sauce. The cheapest bottle actually had its price rise the most due to inflationary pressures, while the most expensive one has had its price impacted the least. So with 63% of Americans recently polled by CBS News viewing the economy as bad, this disparity could explain why, despite the stock market reaching record highs and GDP continuing to grow. Well, a crucial moment for President Biden and his campaign. Coming up, we are going to look at the stakes ahead of the president's first news conference since his debate with Donald Trump. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
To the Daily Report, I'm Lindsay Reiser, and here are some of our other top stories tonight. Sudan ceasefire talks brokered by the UN began Thursday in Switzerland, but only one side of the country's warring parties showed up. War erupted last year between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. 25.6 million people in Sudan are now facing a hunger crisis. The UN did not disclose which side failed to appear for talks, but both are invited back Friday. Firefighters put out a fire at a historic cathedral in France Thursday. The fire broke out in the cathedral's spire in the northern city of Rouen. The spire has been undergoing renovations for years and was surrounded by scaffolding and cover when the fire broke out. No one was hurt. A GOP-led effort to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in inherent contempt of Congress failed Thursday. 4 Republicans crossed party lines to oppose the measure. The resolution would have imposed a fine of $10,000 per day on Garland for defying a congressional subpoena. As we've been reporting, President Biden is set to speak to close out the NATO summit in Washington. He'll hold a rare solo press conference, his first since his shaky debate performance against Donald Trump. And it comes as more Democratic lawmakers call on Biden to exit the 2024 race. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang is back with us. Weijia, what are the stakes here for the president, and what are we expected to hear from him?
Well, Lindsay, President Biden wants the focus to be NATO because, as we know, for most of his career, he has spent a significant portion focusing on foreign policy, which is why he says when it comes to anything having to do with international relations, he is the capital T only person for the job, trying to warn Americans what would happen if Donald Trump were president instead. But obviously, as you mentioned, the stakes are incredibly high because this is an event where it is folded into the White House's and the Biden campaign's strategy for damage control. They started highlighting this press conference last week, saying that, look, the debate was just a one-off, and he's able to do a sit-down interview that is very extensive. He's able to do a press conference and take questions off the cuff. He's already had an unforced error tonight when he accidentally called President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, President Putin. He quickly corrected himself. But those are the things, Lindsay, that he really cannot afford at this point. And especially if we see an episode like we did during the debate, during this press conference, I don't know that he'll be able to recover because there is already so much concern and so much doubt about whether he is fit to continue to be the candidate.
Is the White House concerned about Democrats who have yet to make up their minds, or are they pretty dug in at this point?
They're absolutely dug in because, even if there is a wave of Democrats in Congress calling for the president to step aside, the fact is, Lindsay, it is up to President Joe Biden. There are primaries in this country for a reason, and that is to earn delegates. And sources continue to point out that Biden earned those delegates, and he is the only one who can release them. And he has made it abundantly clear that he has no plans to go anywhere. And he has challenged anybody who's even thinking about it. And he said, if you doubt me, why don't you run against me yourself? So he is defiant. That said, Lindsay, we both know very well that just because a politician says something in public, that doesn't mean it's ultimately what he is going to do. And there is a lot of time between now and November. We expect he will become the official nominee of the Democratic Party in just a matter of weeks. That doesn't mean he can't step down after that. And so, I think it's way too early to try to make any predictions. But if you ask the White House, if you ask Joe Biden, he will tell you firmly that he is not leaving this race.
Real quick before you go, we don't have a lot of time left, but the president says these are his delegates and only his, and that he doesn't want to disenfranchise voters. But there was no real robust primary challenger. The party fell in line behind him.
That's right. But that's typical, right, for any incumbent. And so it might be a broader question about the way that the system is set up. There were, there was another candidate, Dean Phillips, who tried to shake things up and just didn't go anywhere. But there could have been, there just wasn't that platform and campaign to have somebody else because it was a very different situation during the primaries. He had a firm hold on the Democratic Party. And it was way before all these questions, in public at least, started emerging about whether he can handle the job. So there is a clear line, Lindsay, pre and post-debate. And right now we're living in the post-debate world, which is why, it's really unknown what is going to happen.
Okay, Rita Jang, thank you. Well, you may have noticed that Project 2025 is gaining a lot of traction in the media lately. And the plan from the ultra-conservative Heritage Foundation aims to overhaul several portions of the federal government. Some of the proposed changes include a restructuring of the tax code. The plan would eliminate the long-standing system of 7 tax brackets based on yearly income. Instead, it proposes just 2 tax rates, a 15% flat tax for people earning up to $168,000 annually, and a 30% income tax for anyone earning above that. Other tax proposals from the blueprint include reducing both the corporate and capital gains tax rates, eliminating credits for green energy projects, and the introduction of a national consumption tax. Howard Gleckman joins us now. He's a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. Thanks for being with us on this. What are Project 2025's reasons for these proposed changes?
Well, they really have a 2-step process to talk about. The first one would be, as you say, lowering tax rates, particularly for higher income people, getting rid of deductions, other tax preferences. The second step is to go to a consumption tax, to completely change the U.S. tax system from an income-based system to a consumption-based system. And then on top of all that, the third thing they want to do is they want to make major administrative changes to the IRS, where they would put a lot more political people in the agency and fire a lot of career people.
What does a consumption-based tax mean?
So a consumption-based tax can mean a lot of different things, but essentially what it means is you take your total income, you subtract what you spend on anything at all, whether it's healthcare or a car or anything else, and you pay tax on what you spend. You don't pay tax on what you earn. So that could be a value-added tax, it can be a flat tax, it can be many other different versions. And in this document, they don't really say which one they support. They just say they want to eventually go to a consumption tax.
Who would this most directly impact?
So it's hard to know who gets hurt by this because they never say what the standard deduction is. For low-income people, moderate-income people, the standard deduction is a big deal. But as you said, there's 7 rates, and 3 of them, 32%, 35%, and 37%, are higher than 30%. So it's pretty clear that high-income people who are currently paying top rate higher than 30% would benefit significantly. They're also going to benefit substantially from those lower capital gains rates. Many of them are paying capital gains rates almost at 25%, and in this proposal, they'll be paying them as low as 15%. So a big deal for high-income people, impossible to know really what it means for lower-income people.
What about the U.S. economy? And I know that there are still questions to be answered here, but any idea right now of the impacts this could have?
So one of the things we also don't know from this is whether this is a tax increase or a tax cut. Given the people who proposed it, it's fair to say it's probably a tax cut. We don't know how big that is. and we don't know who's going to benefit from it. So with all that said, it's hard to know. It's also important to recognize that another part of this proposal would raise tariffs again, and that is bad for the U.S. economy. We do know that.
Trump and his campaign have worked to distance themselves from Project 2025. It's unclear how they feel about this tax proposal, but has he publicly supported, what has he publicly supported, rather, when it comes to his own preferred tax policy?
So he started the campaign by saying he mostly favored cutting corporate tax rates. Then he shifted a little bit in the middle of the primaries and said, well, he really wants to continue the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That was a 2017 tax bill that passed under his watch. That proposal, extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, is very different than this proposal. So it's hard to know how much of this he actually would support. Now, many of the people involved in developing this proposal were people who were helping him in his first administration. So it's possible that he would make some shifts. We don't know. As far as a longer-term proposal to create a consumption tax, I have no idea what he thinks about that. I don't think he's ever really talked about it.
To be continued. Howard Gleckman, thank you.
Happy to see you. Thank you.
Testimony in Alec Baldwin's involuntary manslaughter trial continued for a second day Thursday in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The trial comes nearly 3 years after cinematographer Helena Hutchins was killed by a gun that Baldwin was holding on the Rust movie set. 3 police officers involved in the investigation took the stand. Baldwin's attorney also grilled a crime scene technician about how live rounds made it onto the film set.
I do not have any physical evidence to show where the live rounds originated from.
There is zero evidence in this case that Alec Baldwin brought a live round onto set, correct?
Correct.
There is zero evidence in this case that Alec Baldwin loaded that live round into that gun, right?
Correct.
Baldwin has pleaded not guilty and says he did not pull the gun's trigger. If convicted, he could face up to 18 months in prison and face a $5,000 fine. More coverage of Baldwin's trial can be found on the Inside Edition stream. That's available at insideedition.com/live. Well, in Arizona, temperatures are high and so are the stakes for the 2024 presidential election. Morgan Lowe with our Phoenix affiliate joins us to discuss what issues the race could come down to in the Grand Canyon state. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most
world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The 2024 presidential race is heating up in battleground states, and Arizona is one of them. Arizona has a Democratic Governor, Katie Hobbs, and Senator Mark Kelly. Senator Kyrsten Sinema was elected as a Democrat in 2019. She became an independent in 2022. Both chambers in the legislature are Republican-controlled, and historically, Arizona was considered a red state. Despite this, it's recently become more purple. In 2020, President Biden narrowly beat former President Trump by just over 10,000 votes. And to give you an idea of how rare that is, the last two Democratic presidents who won there prior to Biden had been Bill Clinton in 1996 and Harry Truman in 1948. For more on this, let's bring in my friend Morgan Lowe. He's an investigative reporter with our Phoenix affiliate KPHO, where I used to work, full transparency. So, Morgan, every time I talk to my friends and family in Arizona, they want to talk about two things: how hot it is and the cost of living. How is the latter influencing voters ahead of the election?
You know, Lindsay, I think that's the big thing that's going to be on the ballot. That's not even on the ballot. It's the cost of living here. People are paying more for gasoline, gas, and Arizona is more expensive than surrounding states except for California. They're paying more for their groceries, and they're paying a lot more for their housing. Arizona was known as a pretty cheap place to live, especially the Phoenix area for years and years. But really, in the last 5 years, the cost of housing has increased dramatically. 30% rents have gone up. And what that amounts to is about $500 a month. The average rent has gone up in Arizona, in the Phoenix area. And that is something that doesn't bode well for the party in power. It doesn't bode well for the president, because you're paying more money every month. You blame the guy at the top. And so we're really feeling that, and we're hearing about it from lots of people here in Arizona.
Low cost of living attracts more people move, they drive up the rent prices, and the wages don't keep up. So, Morgan, you, of course, covered the border extensively for KPHO. It's a hot-button issue, this election cycle nationally. Illegal southern border crossings did fall to a 3-year low in June. Based on your reporting, does this issue motivate Arizona voters?
So the border is sort of a funny thing here in Arizona. It gets a lot of attention every 2 years, every time there is an election cycle that comes around. You have to say that the border is a big issue for voters here in Arizona, but it's not the issue. And when I say that, I mean that Republicans, for example, who run hard right on border issues, tend to not win statewide elections here. So it's at the forefront of voters' minds, but it's not the issue that drives them to the polls. In the last 2 or 3 election cycles, the hardline border candidates on the right have failed to win statewide elections. So I would say that the border is a big deal here, but not as big of a deal as somebody, say, in the Midwest might think it is.
Of course, we're looking at footage from some of your reports. Morgan, let's talk about reproductive rights. There was a pre-statehood abortion law that took effect after Dobbs was overturned. Earlier this year, the Republican-controlled legislature enacted a less strict law because of public pressure. This is going to show up on the ballot too, right?
Yeah, there is a ballot initiative that the supporters collected a lot more signatures than they were required to. It's expected to be on the ballot in November. And what this would do, it would enshrine the right to abortion up to the point of fetal viability. This was looking like this was going to be the issue in the election when the Arizona State Supreme Court sort of put into effect this pre-statehood abortion ban. But then the Republican legislature passed a new law that sets it at 15 weeks, which isn't obviously quite as strict as what we had seen before. So the question is, are Arizona voters okay with this 15-week ban, or are they going to be coming out in droves to try to enshrine the right to abortion in the Constitution? And we just don't know how that's going to turn out.
I got less than a minute with you, and I want to talk about two more important things, the Senate race and election integrity. Go.
Yeah, the Senate race, we've got a pretty popular Democrat in Ruben Gallego running against Carrie Lake, who ran for governor, barely lost, but she did lose. Gallego is really out fundraising Lake in that respect and is ahead of her in the polls. And in addition to that, we have this big election integrity issue here. We've seen many other states, and here in Maricopa County, we've got a county recorder who's in charge of the election, Stephen Richer. He's a Republican. He's a very conservative Republican, but he's been the target of these election deniers. So we're really interested to see if this Republican, who's a Republican in every box you can check, except for that election integrity area, if he's going to manage to get reelected with the support of people who have criticized him in the past.
Morgan Lowe, appreciate your time. Thank you. In Hawaii, high winds are fanning a brush fire burning across parts of Maui. As of Thursday morning, the flames have burned through 5,000 acres. No homes have been threatened, but a national park was forced to close. This comes less than a year after wildfire devastated the Maui community of Lahaina. More than 100 people were killed, and there was nearly $6 billion in damage. Some 2,400 miles away, extreme heat and dry conditions are fueling two wildfires in Southern California. More than 3,000 personnel have been deployed to fight the larger Lake Fire in Santa Barbara County. Since last Friday, it has grown to more than 29,000 acres. It is now the state's largest wildfire this year. Still to come, a massive piece of history could be yours for the right price. How much this Dino could go for, and why its sale is facing some criticism. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh,
You're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Shelley Duvall, known for her critically acclaimed role in The Shining, has died. Duvall's first role was in the 1970 film Brewster McCloud. In 1980, she starred as Jack Nicholson's wife, Wendy Torrance, in The Shining. You see that on your screen. The same year, she appeared in Robert Altman's Popeye as Olive Oyl opposite Robin Williams. Duvall had previously opened up about her history of mental illness. Her partner says she is now, quote, free to fly away. Shelley Duvall was 75 years old. Well, the most complete Stegosaurus skeleton ever discovered is going up on the auction block, much to the chagrin of paleontologists. The Jurassic period fossil named Apex was put on display at Sotheby's in New York Wednesday. Apex is around 150 million years old, measuring 11 feet tall, nearly 27 feet long. The auction house says Apex could sell for up to $6 million when it goes up for sale on July 17th. Many paleontologists, though, criticize such sales, asserting that such incredibly rare finds should be preserved in public spaces. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. President Biden takes to the global stage at the NATO summit amid growing calls from members within his own party to step aside. Plus, a pier meant to deliver more aid to Palestinians will soon shut down as Israel extends its operations in the Gaza Strip, the latest on the war and ongoing humanitarian crisis. And U.S. consumer prices are continuing to moderate. What the latest CPI numbers mean for your wallet. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really
is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does that mean in English?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting. At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party? Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024? Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.